and happy Father's Day to all you fellow dads out there. Been a while since I've been on here, but finally we got into a little bit more of an active weather pattern to where we have a few days at least to talk about some more interesting weather. So I figured what better day to spend Father's Day, what better way than to sit here and drink a beer and talk a little bit about the weather. And so for here Sunday, we've already got an enhanced risk of severe weather just kind of touching the western parts of the Dakotas, a slight risk reaching a little bit beyond that, and then a marginal risk kind of making its way into southeastern parts of South Dakota. These are mainly as you get into this section here, this is for or later into the night. And actually, most of this activity through our area, through the Dakotas and Minnesota, is going to be occurring through the overnight hours and into early Monday morning. And then for Monday, that enhanced area kind of shifts to southeastern portions of Minnesota as those storms kind of track to the east through the early morning hours on Monday. We're kind of left with this area that's going to be sitting nice and warm as we get into the afternoon hours. And then as we go a little bit further back to the west, these areas here in the slight risk across southern portions of South Dakota, we're mainly looking at maybe some hail and some wind, not as much of a concern back there. And those areas are going to be more so in the late afternoon to evening hours, but nonetheless, a bit of a risk, a scattered risk in through southern portions of South Dakota as well for Monday. You can see here as we go into Sunday afternoon, we're already starting to see some storms fire up across Montana. And that's kind of the catalyst here for what we're looking for storms going into the overnight hours into the Dakotas as those storms kind of spread to the east and maybe even spread just a little bit further south. So kind of including this area that they've got marked in the slight risk through the overnight hours across western portions of South Dakota. We also have this area in northeastern portions of South Dakota that's moving off to the north and east into kind of this drier area here. You see the dew points in the mid 50s and even the 40s as you get a little bit further northeast of that. But as you go further to the south, we see 60-degree dew points across a good portion of the Dakotas and into southern parts of Minnesota, and 70s even a little bit further south than that. And so we're looking at these southerly winds that are going to continue to pull up those 70-degree dew points and create a good little juicy atmosphere across southern portions of Minnesota for Monday. Now, as we look at the jet stream, we do see this upper level shortwave that's basically kicking off those storms right now across Montana. And that's going to be sliding east, as I said, through the overnight hours as we follow this along. This is right around midnight or so. So some of those storms kind of entering into western portions of the Dakotas at this point. And then about 4 a.m. and 7 a.m. So you can see how that jet streak kind of pushes into northwestern portions of Minnesota at this point. So you would expect some of those storms to kind of be down in through here by the early morning hours of Monday morning. We also see a low-level jet stream that sets up through the overnight hours, and typically that will help aid some of these storms through the overnight hours and push them and allow them to move eastward as we go into the early parts of Monday morning. And that is indeed what one of the convective models shows here. We've got another little area that begins to pop up across eastern portions of Wyoming. We've got this area into portions of Montana that fire up as well. And then as we go into the overnight hours, this is closer to about 9 or 10 p.m. this evening Central Time. You can see how those storms across portions of northwest South Dakota continue to move on. Probably some large hail associated with it, some stronger winds, maybe an isolated tornado, but I think the hail and the winds ultimately is going to be the threat through the overnight hours. This is around midnight to 1 a.m. Then we continue on. This is about 3 to 4 a.m. and you can see this area kind of starts to congeal and move into that area where I was showing where that upper or that low-level jet sets up just to the north of that, just begins to move into that region, into more so the eastern portions of the Dakotas, more so North Dakota by about 3 to 4 a.m. time frame. And finally, once you get into that 6 to 7 a.m. time frame, just begins to move into Minnesota, sort of where I was showing earlier based on where the setup is going to be with that low-level jet. Now, as we continue on through the remainder of Monday morning, it looks like those storms should move eastward, and by the time we get to about that noon time frame, that first pass of storms should be moving by. Hopefully we'll get some clearing on the back side of that and allow those temperatures to warm up and get really juicy and and reset the stage for Monday. So going back to our jet stream, there you see that in the morning moving eastward, pushing those storms more so into Wisconsin. And then as we look a little bit further back to the west, here's our next little kicker as we go into the afternoon hours. And as that approaches portions of southern Minnesota, kind of on the nose of that jet stream is where we're looking at those storms firing up going into Monday afternoon. And as we look at those dew points that we were looking at earlier, you can see those 70s begin to move into southern portions of Minnesota, and those 60s begin to move all the way into northern parts of Minnesota as well for Monday. So those southerly winds really begin to pull more of that moisture, more of that higher moisture content deeper into Minnesota. And then once those morning storms move by and we get a little clearing on the back end of that going on into the afternoon, we're looking at highs getting into the low to mid 80s, really getting things juicy for southern Minnesota. Now, of course, the one little caveat is if some of those storms take a little longer to move through, it rains a little longer, the clouds don't move out, then we don't get as juicy of an atmosphere and things just kind of sit there and maybe it kind of puts a damper on some of the severe weather. But for now, we're kind of expecting things to clear up through the afternoon and kind of setting the stage for some severe weather going on into Monday. So if we look again at the convective model here, we see those storms begin to move into Wisconsin through the early afternoon hours, resetting the stage essentially for southern portions, mainly southern portions of Minnesota. However, we do see those dew points climbing into the 60s a little bit further to the north. So we do have the potential of seeing some severe weather further north as well, mainly some hail and some stronger winds. But areas a little bit further south, I'd say kind of in the southern third or so of Minnesota, we've got potential of seeing some pretty large hail, some damaging winds, and even the possibility of a few tornadoes as well. Now, don't take some of this as gospel, but just kind of as an idea of what could happen as we get into the afternoon hours. This is around 3 or 4 p.m. You can see a line of storms basically fire up and move across the Twin Cities area by about that time. And then more storms begin to develop further down to the south and west, down into Mankato and portions of southwestern portions of Minnesota as we get closer to that 6 to 7 p.m. time frame. And those storms kind of look like they're going to congeal more as we get into the evening hours. But here we're still looking at the possibilities, some very large hail, some strong damaging winds, and even a tornado or two possible as we get into the evening hours. But as I said, those storms look like they should congeal as we get more so into the evening hours and creating more of a strong damaging wind event as they continue on into Wisconsin and Iowa through the evening hours. Now backing it up just a bit, and you can see how some storms fire a little bit later into parts of southern South Dakota and Minnesota as well. They don't look to be quite as strong, and these are more so, I mean, we're looking probably after 7, 8 p.m. and on into the overnight hours, but maybe some small hail, a little bit gusty winds with them. Not really too concerned about it at this time. If there is any possibility or if there's any kind of rogue isolated cell that should fire up late in the afternoon into early evening hours down here, would be a little stronger. So if you get a storm that fires up earlier than expected, those have the potential of having a little more kick to them and some larger hail, some damaging winds with them. But it looks like ultimately, I think more so that weather should occur through the overnight hours. And once we get beyond Monday, it looks like that jet stream kind of dips a little bit further to the south as we get into that midweek. However, as we get a little bit later into the week and more so into the weekend, we get a nice little ridge that begins to set up. We're going to be seeing some temperatures warm up under this dome. We're going to see some heat going on finally across portions of the Dakotas and Minnesota. But also, as we allow this ridge to kind of move a little bit further to the east, we get what is known as sort of the ring of fire in through here. Now, the models typically don't handle these short waves that move across our region when it comes to these ring of fire type of situation. So we got to look at it as we get closer to the event. So as we get closer to the weekend and on into next week, we'll see kind of maybe a little better, or we'll get a little better feel for maybe the potential at least of some severe weather across the Dakotas, especially as we get into the weekend and next week. So we continue to get into a little more of an active pattern. It is that time of year finally after all, so we get to have some interesting weather around here. And not to mention, a few of you could probably really use the rain at this point, especially across portions of South Dakota and Minnesota. So hopefully hopefully we can get you some rain with some of these storms and maybe keep the hail and some of the damaging stuff away from the important areas. All right, everybody, once again, cheers to all you dads out there. Keep safe and have a good day.